Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's SAG-AFTRA conversation. My name is Tangcay. I am so excited for today's conversation. Today, I'm going to be talking to Brian Cox, who has won 2 Olivier Awards, an Emmy Award, a Golden Globe Award. He's got over 221 film credits to his name, including LIE, Rob Roy, X-Men and the Bourne Identity. And right now we can see him in Succession playing Logan Roy, Father of the Year. Welcome, Brian.
Welcome. Thank you.
How are you doing?
All right. Just hanging in there like everybody else.
Whereabouts are you quarantining?
I'm at my house. I have a house upstate New York. And normally I have a little cabin where I work out of, but because this came upon me very suddenly, I'm just outside my bedroom door at the moment.
I love it. So I'm so excited to talk to you and just, go through your incredible career. But let's go all the way back to that first moment, whether you were watching a movie or a theatrical production, or just that moment when you wanted to first be an actor.
Well, I was probably about 2.5, and it's not very politically correct now, but in those days, our great thing in Scotland, because I'm Scots, so a great thing is Hogmanay. It's a big celebration in Scotland, and people tend to go on a bender for 3 days and get hopelessly drunk and visit each other's what they call first footing. So you go around to each other's house. So my dad was alive then, and everybody would come to our house, and my sister was a bit of a performer, my elder sister May. So I would be put on there was a little coal bunker, which was in the window recess, and it had curtains, and that was my first stage. So I'd be put on the coal bunker, and I would be asked to sing Jolson songs, Al Jolson songs, with all the expressions and the stuff. And I did that, and I remember thinking, wow, this is good. The reaction was very good. I like this reaction. And I remember the reaction of the people in the room, and it was quite it was about, it was quite about 15 to 20 people in the room. And it stuck with me. And then my sister, she says, I have to be very Scottish for a minute. She said, the reason is very simple. My mother. Ma was always at the pictures, the movies. She was always at the pictures, especially when she was pregnant with you. She said, and I think that's what must have been happening to you. I think you must have picked up a lot of stuff when you were in Mum's womb. I think that's a bit far-fetched. But I do think that my first thing was really when my dad and my sister made me perform. They didn't make me. There was no making and called for. It was just I did it. And I kind of always knew that that's what I was going to do. I don't know why. I just had this vision, and then my life was after that was a series of tragedies, which meant difficult things, being on my own quite a lot. But it kind of secured me in where I was going, ironically, even though it was not a very pleasant time. It was, I had this vision of what I wanted to do, and I was lucky enough, and I have been lucky enough to do it.
Yeah. And, as I said, you've had such a remarkable career. I mean, over 221 film credits, an incredible stage.
Not embarrassing.
But who are some of your greatest influences along the way?
Well, in terms of actor, I had many influences. Because I lost my dad when I was 8, so I was sort of fatherless and virtually an orphan, because my mother she had a series of very serious mental breakdowns, so she had to have electric shock treatment. So I was virtually on my own. I had sisters who were looking out for me, but they had their own families, and I did stay with my eldest sister for a time. But I would go to the cinema on a regular basis. So I was sort of, my thing, I discovered something the other day. It was very funny. a film. I was asked to do a thing for a guy called Mark Commode in the UK, and I was asked to talk about my guilty pleasure, a movie that was my guilty pleasure. And I realized that my guilty pleasure movie was a movie that came out just after my dad died. So it was probably the first time I laughed, and it was a film called The Court Jester with Danny Kaye. And I became a huge Danny Kaye fan as a result. I mean, I'd seen him before, but I still occasionally look at that film because it's just a wonderful film. It did disastrous, by the way, at the box office when it opened. But so that was a kind of, so I always saw myself as a comic, really, rather than as a straight actor. But then through my influence of my mum when she was well, I mean, she was a great fan of Spencer Tracy's. Mm-hmm. So, and then of course there was the rise, when I was a kid, there was the rise of James Dean and Marlon Brando. So that was quite influential. Yeah. And then I had a couple of teachers who saw clearly my potential, though the school that I was at had no future for me because it was a technical school and I'm technically inept. I'm a Luddite. I mean, we used to make these little ships, wooden ships, and of course mine looked like a kind of wreck, it wasn't very good. So I knew that wasn't really right for me, and I knew I wanted to get into the theater, and I was very lucky because the guy who had been at school just before me had got this job at the local repertory theatre, Dundee Repertory Theatre, which is an extremely good repertory theatre with a big, big reputation. And so I went for an interview and I got his job. And I was going to the bank, I was doing all kinds of very, very menial tasks. And every night I washed the stage. That was one of my menial tasks, was to wash the stage every night. So that was my start, and it was glorious. I had a great start, and I met all kinds of actors and all kinds of people during that time, and I was able to, kind of suss things out, which is what I've been doing virtually since I was about 9.
Yeah. What's your process? Like, do you create backstories for your characters, or do you go off and read? What do you do to prepare?
Well, I kind of do create a backstory. I mean, the thing I like about my job and what I value more than anything is that the characters remain mysterious, that they have always got a mystery about them. They have a secret. And I've been very lucky that way. I mean, I played parts like I played Hannibal Lecter in the first time that was done. And the thing about Lecter was he had this secret, so nobody knew who he was. And then Tom Harris sort of fell in love with the character and revealed, I think, a little too much. And in Manhunter, he's kind of this creepy guy. You don't know where he's coming from. So, and the audience are immediately enticed in. And I think that's important, that characters have some kind of secret. It doesn't have to be a big secret. It doesn't have to be a dark secret. It's just something that they have, which is not for the audience, but it's for the audience to be intrigued by. And it was what pulls the audience along. And I think Logan Roy is a gift in that way, because we see this man, we know all kinds of things about him, we see all kinds of actions that he does, but we still don't know who he is. We still are intrigued by the man. And that means, from my point of view, it makes it a job a lot more rewarding, that you can play a role and the audience are going with you because they still don't know, who is this guy? What is this guy? Does he love his children? Does he hate his children? Is he, all of these questions that keep coming up. And of course, when you get to the last episode of the last series, everybody's going, what's with the Mona Lisa smile? What is that? I mean, I know what the Mona Lisa smile means, but so people are kind of, the social media went crazy over that one. So, and I think then, if that happens, I think I'm doing my job.
Yeah. So on the subject of succession and secrets, I'm just going to ask you, with Marsha, she's somebody who has secrets, and this whole thing of this dynamic between Logan and Marsha, what is going on there?
Well, I think there's a huge misunderstanding on Marsha's part, actually. I think Logan has a very intense relationship with Rhea, with the character that Holly Hunter played in season 2. But it's not a sexual relationship. It's a business relationship. And of course, everybody confuses it as a sexual one. So all the sort of indications are they may be having an affair. But Holly and I decided quite early on we were not having an affair. You know, that was just an intense friendship that kind of went sour. But of course, from Marsha's point of view, she feels under threat because this is the first person who has come along and threatened the stability of their relationship. And he's not really interested in that way. You know, he's a bit too old anyway for a lot of that. And you know, so he's much more kind of committed to his work and the business, and it's the business that is his true mistress, you know. And I think the great thing about Marsha, the strength of Marsha was in her constancy. She's very constant, Marsha, and that's what he needed. And of course, it was when he was ill, it was invaluable. So it's a source of great sadness to him that the relationship foundered. But he didn't. But then again, Logan is not good at those kind of things. He's not good at sort of examining things and seeing how things are. You know, he doesn't do that. He's not one for great self-examination. So to a certain extent, it's a kind of accident waiting to happen.
Yeah.
But I think that Marsha, he does love Marsha, really does, and she is and he misses her terribly, because she was the consistent thing in his life. And, you know, Rhea was just a professional relationship that got quite intense. But, you know, there was nothing, you know, there was no affair. There was no there was no sexual interest whatsoever. I mean, there was a sort of flirtation, but it went no further.
Yeah. How do you think Logan's going to react once he finds out about Jerry and Roman and that flirtation that they've got going on?
Well, I think that Roman will be very, I think nothing surprises. I mean, it's very interesting if you look at his relationship with Jerry, Rogan's relationship with Jerry, because I do believe that probably quite early on, even before he met Marsha, because Marsha's relatively new, I think,
right,
within the last 10 years. But I think he probably did have a fling with Jerry, the younger Jerry. So I think he'd be a bit surprised and kind of amused. And as long as it doesn't get in the way of business, I don't think he's going to be all that bothered.
One thing that, you know, we've spoken about in the past is the improv environment that you have on set. So what is that like for you as an actor, like going? I'm not a great improviser. I mean, I'm a words man. You know, I've grown up in a tradition of the writer, and it's the writer's words. And, you know, there is this element of improvisation, but I see it as a sandwich, you know, and the improvisation is the bread. And it could be ciabatta, it could be olive bread, it could be sourdough. But the meat of the sandwich is always the same. And that's that's the text, that's the words as written. And it's a great script. It's a fantastically great script. They are great scripts, all of them. So I think that from the improvisation, you know, younger actors love it and some younger actors don't love it. I mean, the interesting thing is, for example, Kieran had never improvised before in his life before this show. He just hadn't done it. And he suddenly discovered he had a talent that he didn't realize he had. And he's extremely fine at it. So they're always giving, and our improvisation, there's a kind of mixture of improvisation and then what they call alts. We get a series of alt lines that we can drop in. So maybe in one take you don't have the alt, and the second take you do. But they're written. Those are written, those alt lines. And occasionally you can throw in something of your own. But I mean, what I think the improvisation does is it helps get the scene going.
and we probably improvise a bit, and then you come in, usually at the end of the improvisation, into the text. That's when the audience enters.
Yeah. What is it like, you know, shooting a scene like Else the OG, you know, being on that end, because Jeremy hadn't presented it to anybody until that moment. So you're sitting down, he's performing, doing this rap, salutes you, places the cap on your head. You know, filming that scene and then working with an actor like Jeremy.
No, it was kind of, I remember that. I was sort of, as Logan would be, slightly dumbfounded by this kind of sudden launch into rap that he does. I mean, we've seen it periodically, but not in a public way. And suddenly he does this public thing, and it has a kind of, it's a little embarrassing for Jeremy. It's a little embarrassing for Kendall. And it's also embarrassing for his father. But he kind of lets it ride. I mean, he's not going to it's not a major upset. He just goes, oh, well, that's what Kendall does. He does these wacky things occasionally. It's it's a leftover from his drug days. That he behaves in a certain kind of way. So I think the other kids go, what the heck's going on with him? I mean, I think Roman is quite surprised at the audacity of Kendall. But Logan isn't. He just goes, oh, well, that's his Kendall. He does that. That's fine. But he's a bit dumbfounded to start with. I mean, he's a bit sort of taken aback, but he quickly adjusts. Logan's very good at that. He adjusts always very quickly to something which would seem to be kind of a little shattering, but he goes, oh, okay. Yeah. Like the end of the season 2, he just, that's something that is, and it's so true. You see, that's the other thing. It's not melodramatic. It's much more reflective of how we behave in life, actually, and that's the great thing about the script.
Yeah. Have you given much thought to what Logan thinks of his children now after that season 2 finale? Like,
I don't think he throws down a gauntlet. Not necessarily. It's Kendall who raises it. He says, do you think that I could be the leader of this company? Do you think I could run this company? And Logan is in severe doubt about that because Kendall's history is somewhat kind of fractured. He's not reliable as a source. He's got this drug problem. We've seen his extremis. We've seen it right through the show. So in a way, he is the heir apparent, but apparently he's not being a proper heir. He is. It's very hard to be, and he has to tell the truth. I mean, Logan just says, "Look, you haven't got it. You haven't got it. You're just not designed that way. You're not designed that way." But he also says that as a provocation. Like it's a provoking thing. Yeah. Will he come up with something? And of course he does. And of course it sort of proves what Logan thinks all along, that of course he's a sneaky little bastard and he's going to, and he's always been a sneaky little bastard. And this is just one more example of his sneakiness on a big scale. So I don't see that. I never saw any problem with that. I mean, I think the real dichotomy for Logan is he does love his children. I asked Jesse that very early on because I kept thinking he behaved so badly. And of course, once you realize that he really does love his children, then you realize that what he's doing all the time is testing them in terms of their own individuality, if they can stand on their own 2 feet. And the problem is they are bruised, not necessarily by him, but he's contributed, but they're bruised by their situation. They're in a kind of, in a sort of high, what's the word? They're kind of in the spotlight, and the spotlight's made them a bit bleary. They can't quite see, but they've been in the spotlight their whole lives because of the children. So they have, and also they have this ridiculous sense of entitlement, you know, which is what is really at the core of a lot of their problems. Logan doesn't have that. He doesn't have entitlement. He is entitled without feeling a sense of being having to have a sense of entitlement. He's proven himself. That's what he did. That's what his life's been about. The kids haven't. And they come with the disadvantages of being kids from a very wealthy background and bruised as well. So it's a real interest to me that the kids have this difficulty in functioning. And he's dying for them to function. And I mean, that's why he puts all his eggs in one basket with Shiv. Mm-hmm. He thinks that Shiv could be the natural successor because she's not tainted like the others are by the business. She's separate. But this problem with Shiv is she can't keep her mouth shut. She blows it. You know, she just does. The Piers thing, you know, it's an embarrassment. And he goes, this is an arrangement between us. And we decide when is the time to do it, you know.
Yeah.
And we haven't got to that decision yet. We haven't come to that point yet because there's a bit of a journey to go. And she's so ambitious to get there so quickly that she screws it up completely. So this is what he's dealing with all the time. There are these obstacles in the children, and of course the saddest of them all in a way, and of course the funniest too in many ways, and you know the kind is Connor, because he's the neglected one. He's the one who's grown up in this kind of fantasy world that he inhabits quite happily, and then this idea that he's going to be president, you know, and then finally. Logan has to recuse them of that and say, look, you know, come on, stop, behave yourself. You know, really, this is ridiculous. Yeah. So it's a very, in that sense, it really is about family dynamic. Yeah. And, you know, once you know that Logan loves his children, you know that he is caught between a rock and a hard place in how to deal with them. And therefore, and of course, he's gruff, he's bad-tempered, he's rude. He's incredibly rude. He tells everybody to fuck off on a regular basis. So, you know, he's a hard act to follow in that way. For any child, it's very difficult to have that kind of dominating a father in that way.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you know, because where do I fit in? Where's my space, says Kendall. Where's my space, says Roman. Where's my space, says Shiv. And Connor says, well, I've given up on my space. I'm just not bothered. I'm just doing it, you know. I'm letting it all hang out and see what happens.
Yeah. You know? What would Logan, I mean, on the subject of, you know, Connor being a politician, what would Logan think of the political world right now?
Oh, he just thinks it's a farce. I mean, he would think it's a farce. He would have no respect for what's going on because there's no dimension to what's going on.
Right.
I mean, I said this the other day, and I think I was rather proud of myself because somebody asked me, would you like to play the president of the United States? And I said, what do you mean, this president? And they said, yes. I said, no. And they said, why not? I said, it's too two-dimensional. It's a bad script. I can't act that script. It's a bad script. And that's what it is.
Yeah.
You know, our president is a terrible script.
I love it. Love it. Are you surprised by how successful and how popular the show has become? Like,
yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I thought, you know, I've been in this game for quite a few weeks, and I thought that the show had tremendous potential. I always felt that, and of course, Jesse, I'm absolutely 100% behind because he's done great work. He did it on Veep. He did it on a show called The Thick of It back in the UK, which is a wonderful show. If you ever get a chance to see it, it's really a lot of these ideas that come into a succession are there, kind of, you know, the embryos of certain things. And I just knew that, you know, when we met when we met on the phone, Adam McKay in LA and Jesse in Italy and me in London, I knew that it had a smell about it which was so good, and it's never disappointed. I didn't know it was going to go as stellar as it did. That was the surprise, and the fact that, you know, I have people coming up to me as I was playing. I was doing The Great Society. I was playing Lyndon Johnson on Broadway, and people would be outside the stage door saying, "Could you video us? Would you video us? And would you video me yourself telling us to fuck off?" You know, I mean, I couldn't believe it. This was astonishing, you know. I mean, but it's the confusion of the times, you know. So it kind of makes sense, sort of nonsense sense.
Yeah. Okay, last question, Brian, and I could talk to you all day, but like, what's the greatest piece of advice you've ever received?
I think the greatest piece of advice I ever received, when I was very young, I was very ambitious, you know, and I kind of wanted fame and stardom, like a lot, you know, like a lot of young actors want, but they don't always face up to or recognize it. They keep it secret to them. But I was ambitious. And I had a great, sadly long dead, wonderful man called Fulton Mackay, Scottish actor, who's in the film Local Hero. You see Local Hero, he plays the old man who owns the beach. And wonderful performance. And he was a wonderful actor. And he used to say, "Oh, Brian." He said, "Don't worry about all that star nonsense. Just say your prayers and be a good actor." And that was the best advice I've ever had. Say your prayers and be a good actor.
Amazing. Brian Cox, thank you so much for joining SAG-AFTRA today in this conversation.
Thank you so much.